high incidence of non-performing assets. Everybody is aware of this story. The government came up with a strategy of 4 R's. Recognizing the NPA, which is the recognition of the problem, and then resolution, recapitalization, and then finally reforms. That year, after the recognition, the quantification of NPAs had started in a very planned manner, and the recovery from the NPAs have also begun from there. And that's a routine process. But after the asset quality review, whatever had been recognized, the recoveries had to happen. So in the last 6 financial years, as a background, I want to put this because the 4 R's were really executed with such meticulousness that the recognition happened, resolution took place, and in some cases it took place, many other cases it did not. And then we kept recapitalizing the banks, as was the 3rd R. And the 4th R was reforms. So in the last 6 financial years, banks have recovered 5,01,479 crores in the last 6 years. I'm just reading the numbers, 5,01479 crores. Of this, you want me to repeat that number again? 5,01479 crores. Of this, 3.1 lakh crores have been recovered since March 2018. Since March 2018, 3.1 lakh crores have been recovered. The total I read out was 5 lakh odd. In 18-19 alone, a record of 1.2 lakh crores were recovered. Recoveries included even those which were recovered from so-called written off. You have this written off, which every now and then becomes a debatable point for people who don't understand writing off in the banking parlance. So 5,01,479 in total recovery crores in the last 6 financial years. 3.1 lakh crore were recovered since March 2018. 1.2 lakh alone, 1.2 lakh crores alone was recovered in a single year, which is 2018-19. And I also want to highlight, this includes 99,996 crores, which were recovered only from written off assets, such as Bhushan Steel, SR Steel, and so on. So, the Asset Quality Review 2015, we then go on to talking about the 4 R's, and then also looking at recovering from NPAs. All this has been happening. So keeping in line with the 4 R's, recognition, resolution, even as they are happening, recapitalization. I just want to draw your attention that in 2017-18, government infused 90,000 crores. And in 18-19, 1.06 lakh crores. So 17-18, 90,000 crores. 18-19, 1.06 lakh crores. 19-20, 70,000 crores. 2021, 20,000 crores. And in the budget speech of 21-22, which is the latest, we had said that the government will infuse 20,000 crores to the banking sector in this financial year, 21-22. So of the 4 R's, recognition, resolution, even as they were happening, recapitalization has also happened. Reforms. I will not get into the details, but I'll just flag off. Bank mergers, managerial reforms, bringing cooperative banks under the RBI, several supervisory action framework for primary cooperative banks, and so on. Since 2014, creating the Bank Board Bureau, strengthening asset reconstruction companies which existed, creating also a framework for key performance indicators for the banks, and strengthening of risk management practices. So reforms, I can go further to say willful defaulters were not sanctioned at additional benefits for the bank's sake. Willful defaulters have also been debarred from accessing capital markets to raise funds. These are all reforms which were carried out in order that the banking sector improves. The jurisdiction of the Debt Recovery Tribunal was increased from 10 lakh to 20 lakhs so that the DRTs can focus on high-value cases. 6 new DRTs have been established so that recovery can be fast. So if under the reforms, the capitalization, bank mergers, managerial reforms, fraud detection, in that I'll just highlight the large frauds. Frauds are detected as a continuous process. But the large frauds, say of 100 crores or more, have an average lag time of about 57 months. That's the average, I mean. So, big frauds which have happened 57 months earlier were all getting detected. As a result, some people would say, how is it that there are more NPAs now? NPAs are not born overnight. Particularly NPAs resulting out of 100 crores or more do have their lag time. And finally, I did say for the 4th R, reforms as bank mergers, managerial reforms, fraud detection, fraud prevention steps were also taken quite a lot with the RBI on course. The Fugitive Economic Offenders Act of 2018 is showing a lot of result in getting people from outside. And the last highlight before I get to the subject of the cabinet clearance is because we kept very closely looking at the managerial and also professionalism in the banks. Banks in 2018, just 2 of the 21 public sector banks were profitable. In 2018, just 2 out of 21 public sector banks were profitable. I'm happy to say 2021, meaning 2020, 2021, only 2 reported loss for the full year, that is. Incidentally, banks have also been raising monies in the public, equity and debt. Because as we go with the 4 R's, banks are today able to come out of the prompt corrective action. They're also making profit. They're also going over to raising money from the markets. I'll just give you a couple of examples so that I can tell you why I had to tell you this story from 2015. Union Bank of India raised 1,447 crores through QIP in July 2021. Canara Bank has raised 2,500 crores in August 2021. Bank of India has announced a QIP for about 3,000 crores. State Bank of India said that its board has approved raising capital by way of issuance of Basel III compliant debt of about 14,000 crores. So a total of 58,697 crores are raised by the public sector banks, both as debt and equity, and of which 10,543 crores are equity alone. So banks are not waiting for the government to infuse equity. They are going to the market and on their own standing raising equity and also debt. So today, in the first 5 months of this year alone, 7,800 crores have been raised as against 10,500 and odd in the last year. So if I started with 2015, asset quality review, recognition, resolution, recapitalization, and reform, today we see that the banks have come out. The only thing which, as was promised in the Union Budget of 21-22, is to set up the National Asset Reconstruction Company Limited so that those assets which are sitting in the balance sheet of banks, which are NPAs, for which provisioning has been done, full provisioning has been done over the last few years, there will now be an asset reconstruction company which will aggregate all this, collect it and take it over, make sure that the managing and disposing of it is done professionally, and which will therefore result in banks' balance sheets and books being cleaner, transparent. They will now be able to stand on their own and do their business. We have proved it because banks are going out and raising resources. So the setting up of the National Asset Reconstruction Company Limited has this as the background. With this, I think between 2014 and 19 and 19 to today, the entire cycle of cleaning up the public sector banks, removing from them those assets which are NPAs, putting them into an organizational structure which is registered as a company, aggregation can be made and they can get into that organization, and then an asset management company would deal with reorganization, revaluation, and making sure that they are finally sold off. And for the professional management of this, even as we are setting up the National Assets Reconstruction Company Limited, we are also setting up an India Debt Resolution Company Limited. In the National Asset Reconstruction Company, banks, the public sector banks themselves will have a 51% ownership. And in the India Debt Resolution Company, public sector banks and public financial institutions will hold a maximum of 49% stake, and then the private sector lenders will also be participating in it. So what this does is actually give us a complete picture of the Indian banking sector reform, cleaning up of the books, taking away the NPAs, and getting the banks their dues in the due course. And why do I say in the due course? Even as these are being culled out of the bank's books and put into the National Asset Reconstruction Company, a 15% cash payment will be made to the banks for the assets based on some valuation, and the rest will be 85% be given as security receipts. For the security receipts to hold on and to have their value intact, there is a need for government to give the backstop arrangement. And that is why this 30,600 crores has been cleared by the cabinet yesterday. There are several private sector asset reconstruction companies, about 28 of them in the private sector. all of which are doing some kind of resolution, but they do not take up big ticket asset resolutions. They hesitate to come in for that kind of a number. Therefore, there's a need for government-backed security receipts to be given, and once the asset is finally managed, valuated better, and then when it is sold through asset management companies, the rest 85% will be given to the banks, which are held as security receipts for some time. The security receipts are getting the backstop through the government's funding, only in as much as to be able to pay the gap between the realized value and the face value of the security receipts. And this will hold good only for 5 years. And in order that there are no delays in the process, the rate of the payment, they will have to pay a fees, even that will go on increasing. So there is an incentivizing for speedy disposal of these assets, more as an ongoing concern than as a liquidation. Of course, there will be coordination with IBC and all other debt recovery processes as well. I've given you a broad picture. I've also given you a background. This, I'm happy to say, is a short and a medium term way in which the banking sector in India has been, in totality, we have addressed the issues.
They use it as a growth capital, and the banking system becomes more robust. So it is a natural way of an incentive or disincentive, you may say, that beyond 5 years, if they delay the process, then they can no longer invoke the guarantee. It gets extinguished. So this is the whole idea behind it, and what ma'am said, the difference between the face value and the actual realization is what is being guaranteed. But in all probabilities, these assets may have an upside, and by guaranteeing and giving this backstop, the entire upside will also come back to the banks rather than getting retained by the NARCL.
The backstop gives a certain credibility for these NPAs which have been sitting in the banks, for which the banks had been repeatedly provisioning, whereas once you take them out, manage them, reevaluate them, and then when you give them out for people to buy it, they certainly have a better prospect of getting a higher value. And that is why this route has been adopted.
Number 10.
Ma'am, this is Ruchi Bhatia from ET now. The IBA has applied to the central bank, the RBI, for the license as well. How soon can we expect that licensing to come in, and how soon will the NARCL be operationalized? If you can help us with the timeline.
The NARCL has already been incorporated as a company, and the name national has also been given by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, because there is more than 51% holding of the public sector banks. The license is in the process of being issued by the RBI, and in the meantime the cabinet approval has also come. The assets which are to move to the NARCL in an aggregated form and get warehoused there in the initial phase has already been identified by the lenders. The valuation also the NARCL has done, based on which this guarantee is also being invoked, where there's an 18% weighted average that has been accorded to this whole thing. Projects worth about 2 lakh crores toxic assets have been identified in the first phase. Those which are completely provisioned, worth about 90,000 crores are going to move to the NARCL.
However, let me add, this entire thing, the structure, the formulation, the working together with the banks, that the government is not putting in any money to form these companies, have all been completely undertaken with a lot of consultation with the RBI. So for giving the permission, it shouldn't take much of a time. It should happen sooner rather than later.
Number 9.
Ma'am, if I could just ask you a bit on the reform aspect that you spoke. Another key reform which you had sort of announced in your budget speech was on the privatization of 2 public sector banks. So how soon can we see any movement on that?
The moment I'm ready to talk more on it, I will talk. But work is happening at a good pace. You see, this has also happened very quickly. However complicated this would be, it has been sorted out, and the formulation has been appreciated, because there are quite a few asset management companies out there. But when government together with the public sector banks are coming up, it brings in a different dimension, because it can now deal with big ticket NPAs.
Number 50.
Good evening, ma'am. Nikunj from Business Standard. Ma'am, this guarantee that the government is providing, 30,600 crore, this would be utilized for what quantum of bad loans? Will it be 2 lakh crore, the entire that the Secretary said has been identified, or the entire provisioning for which have been done, which is 90,000 crore?
2 lakh crores is what we are saying is the value of that NPA, which is totally being carved out, of which Secretary very clearly said about 90,000 is in the first phase. Once they are parked or warehoused, and then the valuation and everything else happens, and when they are sold off, it is the gap which arises from the face value and the realized value for which this backstop comes in.